Good morning, friends. Thank you so much for making time. And when I know it is a hectic end of year time for all of us, but we have the great pleasure today of having a conversation with one of the experts in the AI adoption fields, Lauren Rodriguez, and we're going to focus on the human aspects of managing change around AI adoption. Briefly, before I had the pleasure of welcoming Lauren into the conversation, I want to give you a sense of where this webinar comes from, sort of the project that it sits inside of. And I should note that my colleague Megan is going to be sharing a poll to get a better sense of who's in the room. And she'll be sharing that poll, the results of that before we move into dialogue with Lauren. So we all have a sense of who's in the room, and Lauren and I can make sure that we are speaking into the listening of the folks who have had the time to join us today and be a part of this conversation. We'll give folks just a quick second to complete that poll, and then I'll share just a handful of slides to give you a sense of the overall equitable AI adoption project, of which the Chicago Public Schools case study and this webinar is a part of. Okay. Well, with 40 of us who are already in the virtual room, I'm going to suggest that we get moving, and folks who come in later will be able to hop right into the conversation. So our goals for today is to talk about why developing guidelines, policies is important, how to design a cross-functional AI steering committee and a stakeholder map as you think about managing change inside of your organization, and then just the real value of cultivating a hands-on collaborative AI learning ecosystem. So those are some of the themes that you're going to hear pulled out today. Again, my name is Sarah DeTroia. I lead our Outcomes AI work at Project Evident, and I'm joined today by Lauren Rodriguez. He's the manager of Enterprise Generative AI at Chicago Public Schools. But you will see that in addition to that, what he really is a force of nature. So I'm delighted to welcome my partner in purpose into this conversation. But briefly, just a sense of what are the other resources that are available to you inside of the Equitable AI Adoption Project? So this project brings together about a dozen nonprofits, both the technical leads and the program leads, to help us build a framework about equitable AI adoption that is just relentlessly practical and tactical. What we realized is that a lot of the resources in the commercial sector and in the nonprofit sector were fairly high level. And when we talk to practitioners, folks who are on the front lines of actually implementing AI, what we heard is that folks really needed just more specifics, more clarity, more examples, and better breadth of the types of things that needed to be attended to when you think about AI adoption. So there are a handful of core resources that are a part of the Equitable AI Adoption Project. Most primarily is that framework that we've developed that we'll be releasing before the end of Q1. That's going to be an interactive tool to support folks in different types of operating roles inside of nonprofit practicing organizations to understand the breadth of components to take care of and to consider when looking at AI adoption. I should note that that framework is also segmented by purpose. So what you might need to attend to when you think about AI adoption is different if you're just trying to manage shadow use, right? We're not doing anything specific inside of our organization with AI, but we recognize that AI is part of the world right now, and we have to protect ourselves and guide our employees around that. That's quite different than if you're thinking about using AI in the administrative side of your house versus the program side of your house, and then ultimately high trust program. And we think about high trust program as something that is client or customer or beneficiary or community facing, or if the outputs of the AI tool are really high stakes, like something like adjudication, sentencing, recommendations. That's a really high stakes outcome. So The framework will be coming out shortly, but we're going to touch on some aspects of that framework over the course of this webinar. Um, Within the Equitable AI Adoption Project, there's 5 case studies and then 5 webinars that are aligned with those case studies, as well as 8 podcasts. All of this is in the service of really lighting up different aspects of that framework and maybe really making it come alive through storytelling. If we can move through some of the other case studies that have already been published that are available to you, the first is Crisis Text Line. That's really focused on technology and how AI can scale impact, not just scale program, scale the impact of your program and considerations to think about as you move towards enterprise scale. Quill.org, how do you stay ahead of the technology curve, right? The technology is changing all the time. What does it look like to be in adaptation mode, constant adaptation around that work? And then, of course, today, Chicago Public Schools, that case study is focused on change management. The AI implementation is at its core managing change. And so how do you achieve that? And how does maybe AI change look different than other types of you try to lead in your organization? And then we have 2 more case studies that will be coming out in 26. One is focused on Beyond 12, and it's looking at data and what does data quality look like, because data is the fuel that really drives AI. And then finally, Talking Points and Aurora Public Schools, stakeholder engagement. How do you think about stakeholder engagement and where you choose to deploy AI, but also in the design of AI tools that you might desire to create? In case you haven't had a chance to check out the other case studies, the QR codes are here. Crisis Text Line, how do you sustain scale impact, and then staying ahead of the technology curve with quill.org. So the AI adoption framework has 8 components. Again, the full framework with detail that's practical and actionable will be released before the end of Q1. But if I could just highlight what the different components are within this framework. The first is safe and fair practice, and we can include designing for outcomes, stakeholder engagement, data governance and risk, the culture of learning and managing change, technology implementation, and monitoring and assessing. Now, I hope what you take away from just looking at this high level components of the framework, it's a lot more than technology implementation. And I think that's the place that we all kind of run towards when we think about AI adoption is let's talk about the technology. But truly, when you think about practical, actionable, real world steps it takes to do AI implementation, it's much more than technology implementation. It's all 8 of these components. And the Chicago Public Schools case really touches on 3 of these components. Safe and fair practice. How do you think about the policies and guidelines that guide AI adoption and AI use inside of your institution or organization? Stakeholder engagement. Stakeholders both live inside your organization as well as outside your organization. And then that culture of learning and managing change. So those are the 3 areas you're going to see us touch on over the course of this webinar. And those are the 3 areas that are really highlighted in the case study. Again, if you haven't had a chance to look at the case study, I encourage you to do so. This is a QR code that'll bring you there. And if you're a visual learner, I assure you there are lots of pictographs and charts within this case study that can bring alive some of the concepts that Lauren is going to share. CPS, as you see here, it's just under 650 schools. It's over 45,000 staff. It's hundreds of thousands of students. This is big time change, guys. So the visuals that are in the case study can really help you understand the different components that Lauren and his colleagues have so carefully woven together to really ensure that the people don't get lost when we think about AI implementation. There are 4 key lessons that are learned that we're going to touch on and are really highlighted in the case study. So the first is really developing and training on safe and ethical AI guidelines, right? That's kind of the cornerstone of AI implementation. How do you follow a change management process? AI implementation is not just technology implementation. It is people. It works with and through people. And so you've really got to adhere to some of the well-known and well-trod understanding of how we manage change through institutions. How do you identify and engage stakeholders throughout the change process. We always say change is a team sport. This is not a one and done check-in with people. So really how you think about monitoring and engaging your stakeholders over time. And then finally, providing ongoing AI training. As I said earlier, the technology is not moving still, it's continuing to evolve. That means that the way that you engage your staff around individual skilling or changes in workflows around how you might want to integrate AI into elements of your program model, all of that's going to require ongoing thinking and ongoing skilling. I encourage people to think about AI skilling the same way maybe you think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is we didn't think that we would do one workshop on DEI and that would resolve any issues around equity or bias inside of our organizations. Many of us took up DEI and thought about the fact that that was an ongoing dialogue and training and discussion inside of our organizations. The same is going to be true for AI skilling. Okay, I don't want to delay much longer getting to Lauren and getting to have his expertise and experience highlighted. But quickly, the poll that we have, we can see that we have lots of folks in the room, 34% who represent nonprofits, about 13% that represent funders. We've got 16% consultants and about 26% are researchers. So we have a diverse group of folks in the room. Please don't hold back on your questions. We really encourage you over the course of the webinar to be using the Q&A function, which I'll be monitoring. We'll weave in responses to your questions over the course of the webinar, but we'll also hold the back 10 minutes at the end of the webinar to make sure that we have time to really focus on some of those questions that come in over our time together. So with that, I have the pleasure of welcoming Loren Rodriguez. In addition to being kind of the key character, along with a handful of his colleagues in the Chicago Public School case study, we are really fortunate at Project Evident that Loren was also one of the design committee members that oversaw the Equitable AI Adoption Project and has been giving us feedback along all the pieces along the way. So Loren, thank you so much for both your willingness to present a candid insight and experience about what it looks like on the people side of AI adoption, but I also just really thank you for your partnership and purpose around the overall guidance of the Equitable AI Adoption Project. So with that, Loren, what is your role at CPS?
Well, thanks for having me. It was a pleasure being a part of everything, and an honor to have a case study written about the work that we're doing at CPS. I'm Loren Rodriguez. I'm the manager of enterprise generative AI for Chicago Public Schools. So I oversee the implementation of AI across the district, both inside and outside the classroom.
And can you give folks on the call just a little bit of a sense of who CPS is?
Absolutely. Yeah. We are the fourth largest district in the country. As you mentioned earlier, just under 650 schools, a little over 500 district managed schools, over 315,000 students, 45,000 employees. Our student population is around 47% Black and 35% Latinx, and also 71% economically disadvantaged. So very diverse student population.
Oh. So, Loren, one of the really fascinating things that came up when we first got to get to know each other is that you potentially had the very first official AI role inside of a public school system. So, CPS was really one of the first. Why? Why was that? Why was CPS interested in AI?
So at the time, this was a little over actually just about 2 years ago when the conversation really kicked off. At the time, I was the manager of digital ecosystem design for our district's digital learning environment called Skyline, which is what my background is. It's our district's digital curriculum, which is free, high quality, accessible to all teachers and students. And so in that role, we started thinking about how could AI impact Skyline and benefit Skyline as our free, readily available district curriculum. But at the same time, our CIO at the time and our deputy chief of teaching and learning, they came together and they decided, you know what, we need to actually start thinking about this holistically for the entire organization. And so they formed the AI steering committee. And that was back in January of 2024 was the first time we held our steering committee. At that time, we were meeting twice a week, a month. So every 2 weeks, we were coming together. And again, because it was our CIO and our Deputy Chief of Teaching and Learning, both the teaching and learning side and the ITS side, they came together and they were like, we need stakeholders from across the organization. So we worked to also bring in members from finance, law, procurement, talent, all departments across the organization, and which has evolved over time. And which again, I can't believe it'll be 2 years in January since we formed the steering committee. But it was really our leadership at the time who felt that we needed to take a district approach to this because this technology was going to have an impact on all of our stakeholders, and we really need to get a handle on things.
So we're going to have a moment a little bit in the future where I love for you to walk through sort of the interlocking committees and ways that you've thought about engaging stakeholders. But before we get there, one of the things I thought was so interesting about that initial steering committee that really brought in diverse leaders, across the CPS ecosystem, is that the very first thing that was on your agenda was creating guidelines for what does safe and fair practice look like. And I'm interested in two things. One, why was that the first thing you chose to do? And then I'm going to ask you a follow-up question, which is why guidelines versus a policy? But let's just start with why was that, steering committee gets together, you've got lots of high-powered diverse folks that are on that group. Why was guidelines the priority number one for that group?
It was the priority because we felt that we needed, as the district leadership that was overseeing AI and thinking about AI, given how large we are, we needed to actually be able to push something out that was what we felt were the appropriate use, guidelines, responsible use of AI, that we could always point back to. And so we didn't want it to be something that ended up being piecemeal or different departments or ending up doing their own versions of different things. Again, given how large we are, that could tend to happen with certain things. There's a lot of silos with the large organization like we have, even within individual departments, there might be even little silos within those departments. And so we wanted to take this opportunity to really break down the silos across the organization and establish what the district thought would be the guidelines for AI implementation.
So, talk to me. I want to first just break down for the audience the difference between a policy and a guideline, because I know sometimes we just use that language pretty loosely and use that interchangeably. Guidelines are best practices, they're recommendations. Policies are legally binding. So, if you have a policy in your department to not spend more than $5 in your budget and you choose to spend 10,000, there's legal repercussions around that because a policy is a legal document that's meant to cap risk for an institution. Now, Lauren, your steering committee made a decision up front that it's not going to be a policy that we're going to generate. It's actually going to be guidelines. Can you talk about that decision? Sort of why did you opt for guidelines over a policy?
Absolutely, yeah. So we released the guidebook in July of last year, and the reason why we did that was because in the steering committee, when we were having conversations about the guidelines that we were going to release, we initially also started with two versions. One came out of ITS and one came out of teaching and learning, and we said that's going against our idea of breaking down these silos. So let's actually combine the documents into a single one, a single holistic guidebook. But the reason why we did that was because the amount of time it takes to actually get a policy set up and then approved by the board and then published, by the point at which it would have been published, it would have been outdated. The information contained, this technology is moving so fast that we needed to be able to be adaptable and flexible along with our guidelines. Because even today, I mean, if we think about last month, even just like last week, was the 3-year anniversary of the public release of ChatGPT. And look where we are now with this technology, right? And so when we think about when we released our guidebook, just a year later, already there's the different types of technology that are readily available for all of our different stakeholders is just drastically different than when we had our first draft of the or first public release of the guidebook. And so we wanted to make sure that we had that flexibility to continue to update it, keep it up to date with the field at large, but also with our stakeholder feedback. So every quarter we go through updates on the guidebook. And so we're on version 5 right now, and version 6 will be released next quarter. And so we really wanted to be and this goes back to like our AI principles and our definition of AI literacy. When we talk about our AI principles, one of them is continuous improvement and innovation. And one of the pillars of our definition of AI literacy is future-oriented perspective, which is really maintaining that willingness to adapt and evolve along with this technology. And we really wanted to practice what we preach and say, we're going to release what the district believes is the guidebook for AI implementation, but with the understanding that we are constantly going to update it and maintain it. And we also keep a version history to ensure that when people do come to the most up-to-date version, which is always available, whenever you click on our guidebook link, it actually is the most up-to-date version on our website. But you can see what has changed from version to version over time.
Wow, that's an extraordinary commitment to keep updating the guidebook on a quarterly basis. I should note for folks that when we did our underlying interviews and research on the development of the case study, they were on version 4. So they are no slouches in terms of really making sure that they're hitting that quarterly assessment of what needs to change in the guidebook. Um, when I hike every weekend, I walk by this sign that says "No nude swimming," and I always look at that sign. And I think, huh, the difference between writing a sign and getting people to follow a sign, like there's a pretty big delta between that. So you've got again tens of thousands of folks who are employees, not let alone the students who are employees of CPS. Writing a guidebook is all well and good, but getting people to adhere and follow a guidebook, what do you do to ensure compliance and ensure awareness in education?
So we push the guidebook out in every opportunity that we have. So whenever we host webinars or conferences, so we have a bunch of different internal conferences, some of which are open to external vendors to come in and do a presentation on whatever the topic that they're talking about. But we tied into the teams that manage those conferences. We tied into the teams that lead professional development. When we're leading professional development, we always have slides in there. We have one slide that is purely just about the guidebook, has a QR code, has the vanity URL. We talk about our AI literacy definition. We talk about our AI principles. And we have a set of slides that if an external vendor is talking about AI in any of our conferences, or we host something called Tech Tuesday. So every Tuesday at 4 o'clock, we have a webinar on a various different topic. We've actually reserved 2 a month for just AI. So we make sure that we have AI vendors come in and talk about things. But we have a set of mandatory slides that they have to include in their presentation. Again, even if they're not talking about CPS at large AI, they're talking about their product, if they're approved, they still have to talk about our slides, which include the guidebook slide, the AI principle slide, the AI literacy slide. So we really push it out as much as possible, and we always refer back to it. But we're also realistic about the fact that given how large we are, we don't have granular insights into what everybody's doing. And so I'm sure there's people who are not necessarily following the guidebook as it should be, but that's why we take that opportunity that every chance we get that we are talking to our stakeholders, we point to it. And then when we have additional opportunities like our community of practice, which is called our CPS neural network, we named it that specifically to say like the human brain is the most powerful processor, and our neural network is our stakeholders networked together in our community of practice. We constantly refer to it in that space, and so we welcome people in, and we always refer to it and talk about it and really reinforce what it is we have in the guidebook.
So you've just mentioned the word stakeholders. And one of the things that I thought was so fascinating, and we have some visuals on in the case study, is the degree to which you did stakeholder mapping. So I'd love just to start with why. Why did you do stakeholder mapping? And then we'll get into some of the detail of what's in that stakeholder map, and then what did that lead you to build because of that stakeholder map? But let's just start with the why. Why was stakeholder mapping part of the change management process for you?
So with something like AI, we were very aware upfront that every stakeholder was going to be impacted by this technology in one way or another. And so when we thought about that, and you think about the quantity of stakeholders that we have in a district, it's everybody, right? And so we had to make sure that we didn't miss anybody, that we thought about everybody's perspectives, opinions, what might they have questions about, what might be the direct impact on them. And given how much information that is, it was essential for us to get it down on paper and organize it in a way that when we start pushing out professional development, we can start targeting specific stakeholder groups. We can anticipate what it is, the types of questions they're going to have, or resistance potentially, so that we can start mitigating those or trying to approach those in advance. And I think at this point, we wanted to move fast, but we also recognize that we need that stakeholder feedback. So by building out the mapping, we were able to attack what we felt was the right approach while providing the opportunity to then still hear from our stakeholders to course correct if need be. And I think so far we haven't really felt that any major course correction. So we felt like everything we've done so far has been appropriate with respect to the individual stakeholders. But it was really essential for us to ensure that we weren't missing anybody and then we were hitting them where they were.
So one of the things that I was really intrigued by on your stakeholder map is, and you just hit upon some of these categories, is that it was what is the potential resistance from somebody who sits in that stakeholder group? Who's like, where do they get their trusted information from? And what are the messages that are likely going to be important? And what I thought was really insightful about that is that so much about change management, so much about managing change is communication. And that you were really thoughtful about it's not going to be a one size fits all communication message. And there are many different channels and many different influencers that folks might speak to. Can you talk a little bit about how, equipped with that knowledge, once you had built those stakeholder maps, what did that lead you to build beyond that initial AI steering committee? Because you have multiple ways that you are organizing change and organizing stakeholder feedback as well as messaging. What does that actually look like?
So it really allowed us to start thinking about the various different partnerships that we have, external and internal, but also to start aligning the partnership strengths with the specific stakeholders by looking at the different components or metadata, if you will, about the individual stakeholder group. So when we looked at individual stakeholder groups, we can say, okay, this stakeholder group can actually benefit from our relationship with this external partner, so we can bring them in and target the stakeholder group for professional development. And that's really what we're focusing on now, because last year was really focused on the foundational infrastructure, so establishing our AI governance and our AI literacy, which we felt was essential in order for us to be able to move fast. We didn't want to move fast on a shaky foundation that could potentially fall apart. And so we really wanted to establish that foundation, get it set, and then be able to move really quickly. And so that's what we're doing now is we're moving very quickly now. We're establishing really strong partnerships with various different groups, targeting specific stakeholder groups so that we're actually hitting all of these different stakeholders, but doing it in a way that's still manageable and actually specifically aligned to the supports that those individual stakeholders would need.
Can you talk a little bit about the subcommittee structure that sits underneath the steering committee and sort of what that looks like and why you chose those different focus areas for the subcommittee?
Yep. So as I mentioned before, so we started our steering committee in January of 2024, and we were meeting every 2 weeks. We released our guidebook in July. We continued on meeting every 2 weeks, and then we reached a point where we were saying we actually need to bring more stakeholders into this conversation, but not necessarily at that steering committee level. That was really meant to be the decision-making level leadership in CPS. And so but we wanted to start having more voices as a part of the governance framework. And so at that point, we decided to actually create at the time we were referring to them as subcommittees. We've actually changed the name to operating committees. Going back to that continuous improvement, we're always okay with changing things when we need to. So now we have 4 operating committees. We started with 3 originally. The first one was instructional practice, operational efficiency, and data and analytics. And we really, when we thought about those operating committees, we wanted to say, okay, look at the organization, and then how can we break the organization up into parts? And when we broke it up into parts, those 3 kind of felt like the sum of 3 individual parts. When you bring them together, they are a CPS or even really any public educational organization, institution. And so that's how we kind of landed on those 3. And then about 2 months after we created those, we said we actually want to bring school leaders as a core part of that governance framework as well. And so we have a fourth operating committee, which is our school leader coalition, and that is made up entirely of principals and assistant principals. So the other three operating committee, and all four of those sit directly below the steering committee. So if you can imagine, there's the steering committee, and then the chairs of all the operating committees actually sit on the steering committee. And so there was a tight connection between the operating committees and the steering committee. So each of those groups focus on their key domains. Across all five of those groups, we have over 100 different stakeholders from across all of the different departments that I mentioned, and some of which even more so focused on departments or offices that are specifically aligned to that key domain. So if we think about the instructional practice one, we have directors and executive directors from our STEM department, Department of Literacy, um, multiple different departments specifically in the education or teaching and learning side of the house to ensure that even within that operating committee, we still have the breadth of knowledge and resources and supports necessary to hit all of our different stakeholders.
It really impressed me. And folks, I know that's a lot to kind of take in terms of what that structure looks like. There is a visual of what that structure looks like in the case study. I think one of the things that really impressed me about the way you thought about staffing is that the chairs of those committees are not people that are from the ITS team, which is the technology department, right? So you can very well think about, oh, well, it's an AI integration, opportunity here. So technology is going to lead this. But you actually didn't make that decision. You have a variety of folks who are in the chair roles. And even when I look at the membership across these five committees, I don't see them over sort of heavily populated by technology, but by folks who have a technology, you sit in the technology department. Can you talk a little bit about why that is? Because I think some people think when they're going to do an AI implementation that this is really the provenance of the tech team, but that's not the approach that you took.
No, because AI implementation is really, as you said earlier, it's a human thing. It's a human change, right? Like this technology, as we stated, is going to impact all of our lives in ways we've yet to really even comprehend or understand or predict. And so this is really a human focused initiative effort. And we needed to ensure that we had non-tech folks leading some of this work. Like the data analytics things, those tend to be a little bit more tech heavy. Operational efficiency, probably a mix. Instructional practice, definitely not. But that's specifically because we need to think about how this technology is going to impact all of their roles and responsibilities and have them inform how this is actually going to be rolled out in the district at large. Because it isn't just a tech thing. It is going to be a major tech thing in terms of when we think about like data privacy and security and development and design of products or build out of software or anything along those lines. But really, we also have to a major component of this is how is it going to impact the classroom, right? We are all here in the district to actually ensure that the priority stakeholder is our students, and we're here to prepare them for life after CPS. They spend, depending on when they enter our system, potentially pre-K or kindergarten through 12th grade with us. Then they leave and they go to higher ed or they're going to go to the workforce, whatever that may be. And our job as a district is to prepare them with the skills and resources they need once they leave our system. And there's a lot more that they're going to need than just the tech side of things when it comes to this technology. And so we wanted to make sure that we were having a holistic vision of AI implementation, AI literacy, or AI fluency, as it now might be referred to as, for our students in particular.
I really appreciate with CPS, the analogy for me here is you're thinking about what does the teaching pedagogy look like, and what does the content of curriculum need to be given this sort of big turn of the wheel in our society and where technology is going. The analogy of that for me is that a lot of organizations begin thinking about AI adoption on the administrative side of the shop, right? There's sort of well documented use cases around how AI can save you individually, but also maybe organizationally in terms of core functions on the administrative side can save you time. Can you talk a little bit about the what did you do on the administrative side that may have softened the ground? And how do you think about then focusing on the mission-oriented side of CPS?
So on the administrative side, we really spent like the operational efficiency operating committee at the time was the focus on more so like the administrative side of things. And so they worked together to put together a whole list of potential use cases, starting to explore those use cases, imagine how they can impact our systems and processes in the organization. And we really started to expand on those and think about how can we roll those out to wider departments and offices, trying to think through what are systems and processes that are the same across our different departments that we can build out AI solutions for and roll them out that can support wider departments and offices, while then getting a little bit more granular in the department or office or process specific needs. And I want to take a second to also note that you mentioned like the saving of the time, and I think that's what from the classroom side of things, I think that's also how it's being sold, and that's not necessarily something we necessarily agree with, like that approach. When we think about like administratively, we also think about like efficiency, right, and not necessarily productivity. But in the classroom, saving time doesn't necessarily mean better learning experience for our students. And so that's a major way that like a lot of AI or specifically tech tools are pitching this to teachers and to school leaders is like we can save you time if you use this, but that doesn't necessarily correlate to enhanced experience for the student. And so we want to shift that thinking as to more less about saving time and more about more impact on the student, more impact on the teacher, and that learning experience that happens between them. But the administrative side absolutely does impact the classroom as well. And so we were trying to show that as like a entryway into AI's impact in the classroom, while expanding on that conversation to say, now how can we actually show that this is having a positive impact on the student's experience?
So before we kind of turn and talk a little bit more directly about following a change management process, we do have one question that's come in from the Q&A. So first of all, big shout out for you and CPS from somebody who's a proud Chicago native. They're wondering about the AI guidebook, which by the way, folks, it's available. I think we've linked to it here in the chat, and it's also you'll see it available as a resource in the case study. But wondering about like, gosh, that's pretty comprehensive. How did you do that? Was that entirely built internally? Did you have a third party consultant? How did you get started on building that comprehensive guidebook?
Yep. So it started, as I mentioned, with the two separate versions, the ITS version and then the teaching and learning version. And then when we decided we needed to put them together, we did bring in a partner. So we brought in AI for Education to support us in bringing those two together and creating the first version of our guidebook. And so we did bring in a partner to support us in basically the collation of those, but also bringing in what else is happening across the nation, which is why we worked with that specific partner because we knew they had worked with other districts, other nonprofits around the country, and so they had an insight into what was going on, and we wanted to bring that insight into what we had already established in the two different versions to make a holistic version. We're actually working with them again. This round of the revisions for the guidebook, the quarterly revisions, because we're at about a year and a half now from the initial release. And even with the updates that we've made quarter over quarter, we wanted again another national view and understanding of what's taking place so that we can do a brand like a really updated version when we release it in January or February next quarter to make sure that we are caught up as much as possible. We're not missing anything that might be discussions that might be taking place in any districts around the country or anything that anybody has seen that has a positive or negative impact and we need to course correct or expand upon. And so we wanted to bring them back in to do like this 1.5 year review and analysis so they can really feel good about the next version that's coming out.
Fantastic. I also just want to call out and say thank you to CPS for making it public, right? You didn't put that behind a firewall just for your community. So that guidebook is available for any other district or any other organization that wants to look at that and use that perhaps as a baseline on which you might modify and build. So just thank you so much for sharing the work with the rest of the sector.
Absolutely. Yeah. And
Um,
we're very intentional about that as well. You know, one of
yeah.
our principles is transparency, right?
Mm,
That doesn't mean just transparency with our stakeholders in our district, which we truly believe
yeah.
in. We want to be as transparent as possible because that builds trust. We want to be transparent with the
Mm,
other districts and the nation at large because we are moving
mhm.
fast. We are doing a lot of things. We can be an example for other districts, but
Yeah.
we also understand like given how large we are, it might not look exactly the same as your district. And so I
Right.
want to make that call out is when other districts that might be smaller look at what we're doing and look at how expansive it is, it doesn't necessarily need to be that expansive if your
Mhm.
district isn't nearly as large as ours is. We
Yeah.
felt like it needed to be given how large we are,
Mhm.
but I think how large we are also prevents us from moving as fast as we potentially could. So there have been
Mhm.
districts who a year ago they saw our guidebook and they weren't anywhere close to where we were. Now they might be considered at where we are or even a little further
Yeah.
ahead because they just took what we did, they brought it into their own context, they adapted it, they utilized it, and
Mhm.
they can move quicker. And so they moved quicker. And I'm all
Mhm.
for that. I want districts to look at what we're doing, critique it, question it,
Mhm.
implement it, and then provide feedback to us because really this
Mhm.
isn't just a community effort within CPS. This is a community effort for all of us, especially when we're
Mhm.
talking public educational institutions across
Yeah.
the country and K-12 in particular, such an important stakeholder group, our student
Mhm.
population of K through 12 with this technology. And so I think we all have to work together to really make sure that AI is implemented in a responsible way in K-12.
Wow, I appreciate the call to community and collaboration around trying to address how AI is going to change our society and change particular sectors within the education and nonprofit sector. In the absence of state and federal guidelines, I think the bottoms up kind of collaboration is just it's so important. Thank you for naming it so clearly for all of us. So there's a really great question I'm going to turn to it in a second about setting expectations in the change management process. But one of the things that was really exciting for me in researching the case study is that Chicago Public Schools actually has a whole team of people that are just devoted to change management. That's how big an organization you are. You actually have a team of people that just do that. I'm interested in, you've had tenure with CPS. What is similar about change management for AI implementation relative to other change activities that you've been a part of at CPS? And what's unique and different because it's AI? So maybe let's start with what's the same. What in this change management process feels the same as other change management processes?
What's the same, I think, is definitely thinking about the stakeholders, individuals or groups, thinking about the impact, potential resistance, anticipated changes for those individuals, and then building out a whole stakeholder engagement and communications and training plan specifically associated with those stakeholder groups. What I think is different is that this technology is impacting everybody. So typically, when we have a change, it's not going to impact everyone. So there might be a new platform change that's happening in a district, and there's only a set of users for that individual platform. So those are the only real stakeholders at the end of the day who should be a part of that change plan, it's because they're the only ones going to actually be aware of the change, right? Whereas this technology is impacting all of our lives, and not just in the technology side of things, but also societal. When we think about mental health, right? Um, and so when we think about that, it's just so much more expansive of a change. And we really need to do this in a very responsible manner because it could have very negative impacts or implications on individual stakeholders if not done so appropriately. And I think we're already seeing some of that from this technology, even in the, again, 3 years since ChatGPT was publicly available. We've seen the worst happen already. And so it's truly important for us to think about all of our stakeholders, the impact on all of the different components of their lives, especially the societal and human relationship side of things, which again, I think AI, to your point earlier, is may think a little bit more technology side, but really the human side is, I think, the most important. But I think that's the major change between like the AI change management and typical change management is just like the breadth and depth with which this change is going to be taking place and therefore needs to be addressed.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting. One of your colleagues talked about the fact that that it at this moment when you're introducing the change around AI, you are stepping into what is a change saturated environment for people. If we think about the last 5 years of what it's been like living on this planet. And so the context in which this change is being received also feels different than the context you might have been able to do a more scaled down change management process, prior to the pandemic, let's say. So this question that came into us is really about expectation setting and expectation management with respect to outcomes and day-to-day changes that stakeholders might experience. Like, how have you set expectations? So, folks, AI is not a neutral topic, right? You're not entering onto neutral ground. AI has been a what we used to say above the fold, right? It's been in the news for the last 3 years. How do you think about in CPS's journey, how are you setting expectations and how are you managing expectations across those different types of stakeholders?
I think it's important to really set expectations up front when especially when we're leading like professional development. And a part of how we do that is we always hold polls in the beginning around how do you feel about generative AI? How often do you use it? How do you feel like it'll impact education? And the reason why we do that is in particular to elevate the fact that every room is going to have a mix of people in for all of those questions in every single room I've ever done that for, and I've done it a lot. And we do a scale of 1 to 5, just like an easy, 1 to 5 in your hand. We get every number for all of the questions, right? And so I think the first expectation is really that you're going to be in a room with people who are going to have different opinions than you. They're going to have different understanding or familiarity with this technology as you. And so I think that's the first expectation is to like, let's all be on the same page with where we're at. The next, I think, is really understanding, setting the expectations for the foundational knowledge that we deem necessary for AI implementation. We don't want to jump into tool use. Let's just jump into enter Gen AI name and start playing around with it. We want to set this expectations that before we even start getting into talking about tools or interacting with tools, we need to understand how do they function? How are they built? What are the underlying components? And also then how does that impact the outputs? And so thinking about bias, ethics, thinking about energy consumption, really grounding all of that. And so that's our second expectation is really making sure that we have that foundational knowledge before we even start jumping into tool use. And then once we jump into tool use, then it's about use case alignment, roles or responsibility alignment, not just talking high level about individual tools, but really making sure that the stakeholders can understand and see themselves in whatever is being presented. Um, and then broader expectations for the district in terms of like implementation. I think we're starting to enter that phase now of actually setting what our outcomes and goals should be. We didn't want to set those too early with how quickly this technology is evolving. With we didn't quite know yet how quickly this would be adopted in terms of the AI literacy components or just the AI use components. And so we're entering that phase now of trying to establish and see where we're at, and then say, okay, now with an understanding of where we are at today, this is how we can set an expectation for where we should be in 6 months or the end of the school year. And so we're in that phase now of being able to, and we actually part of that was we ran an anonymous Gen AI survey in the start of this school year so that we can get an understanding, a snapshot of when we're starting this school year, where are our stakeholders in a various set of questions, which can then support us in setting those goals and expectations for 6 months, a year from now, because we have a baseline upon which we can actually measure that change.
So I have two questions in the Q&A, and I'm going to turn to those in a moment. But I want to close this formal part of the conversation with you, Lauren, by just talking about ongoing AI training, because you've talked a little bit about professional development, and I know you have a badging system that's in place. So can you talk a little bit about like ongoing professional development, why it's not just a one and done activity for your organization?
Yeah, I think the main component is because this technology is just rapidly evolving. And so even let's say because we're a Google district, so everything we do is on Gmail, Docs, Sheets, Drive. Google's pushing out new AI tools all the time. Like I believe it was last week or 2 weeks ago, maybe last week, they just released their Google Workspace Studio, which now has agents, as they're calling it, where you can set up like a Gemini agent to when something like a form response comes in, send this email or send this GChat. Um, and before, we had Gemini integrated into Docs, Sheets, we have Gemini in Classroom. And all these things just keep coming out, keep evolving, new access to things. And so um, it's really important for us to think about that and think about how we react to that, I think. Um, yeah.
The other thing that came up in terms of the badging was just the importance and also some of the professional development that you've done in multiple places. So whether it's neural networking or Tech Tuesday or formal badge learning, you've talked about the importance of training being hands-on. So can you talk about why hands-on matters for doing professional development?
Yeah. So we can show people how to use these tools all day long, but it's really about getting in there and utilizing it yourself, especially when we're talking about like generative AI. There was a period of time when I felt like I was hearing a lot of people would go into a Gen AI system and then do one prompt, get an output, and not be happy with the output, and then never use it again. And so I think it's important to really get people in the tools in a setting where they can feel comfortable with a guide to support them to encourage that, okay, well, if you didn't like that output, what didn't you like about it? Like let's respond back to it. It should be an iterative process between you and the tool. And I don't think that's something that can necessarily be learned just by showing. People need to actually get in there and start experiencing so they can see when I use this word or these words, when I don't enter context or when I do enter context, what impact does that have on the output that the system is providing me? And I think that getting their hands on in there, getting seeing that actually happen in real time encourages them to keep going. And then when they keep going, they start experimenting, they start learning what actually works for them, what doesn't work for them. And so it's extremely important for this technology in particular to really get in there and start experimenting and not just watch from afar because you'll miss a ton when you're not actually getting in there and playing around with, again, like the specific words you're using. And I like to also say when we're talking about something like prompting, um, I say it's just as much like English language arts as it is computer science because what you're doing is you're actually communicating with the machine, right? You're providing context, you're establishing what kind of output do you want from it. And when I'm talking to a human, and I don't like to anthropomorphize, so I'm trying not to do that right now, but um, it's you still have to, when you're talking to a human, you have to provide context, information. If you provide it's not like a Google search, right? You're not going to just go to a Gemini or a ChatGPT and enter what you would enter into a Google search. You have to provide some actual additional information and a format for an output. And just like you would be collaborating with a human and communicating with a human, those are the essential skills that I think are needed. And there's that computational thinking mindset, right? That how can I work and along those lines, but really it's about communication with these tools, which again, hands-on is essential to really get in there and start experimenting with it.
So we have two kind of laser focused questions that are in the Q&A that I'm going to ask you, but I'm going to encourage others in this last 6 minutes to put other questions for things we haven't covered or something that's relevant to you specifically in your context that we can ask Lauren to address. So one of the comments is asking about your computer science courses. So they're like, where does we didn't really touch upon pedagogy. And so somebody's really asking about how do computer science courses play a role in the AI strategy, or does it?
So the computer science department has been working for a while on some AI related
Mm-hmm.
lesson materials, specifically with MIT and the daily curriculum that they have there. And so that's been something that's kind of been ongoing. The director of computer science is a part of our instructional practice operating committee, so they are tied into this work as well. But they are implementing AI literacy courses in the different partnerships they've already had established. And so I think long-term goal is really to expand on what it is they've already done and implement it and tie it into the rest of the work that we're establishing here. Because the focus from my side of things has been really, as I mentioned, AI governance and AI literacy. And my specialty isn't definitely not pedagogy in the classroom. And so that's when I
Yep.
lean on the directors and executive directors from all the various departments. And so I'm happy that we have the director of computer science involved in this work so that she can bring in her side of things, what they've already been working on, and then we can expand on it a little bit more, especially with starting to integrate a lot of lessons and courses into our digital curriculum Skyline, which includes
Mm,
some lesson AI literacy and digital literacy lessons from Common Sense Education.
nice. So Lauren, a couple of specific questions to make sure that folks understand the references that you're making. So one is someone is asking for the link to the MIT reference that you just made. I think it was called MIT The Daily. Is that what you just called that?
Yeah, I'll grab a link for that.
Okay. And the second was that somebody was interested in the vendor that helped you with your guidebook, the name of that organization so they can find it.
So the vendor was AI for Education. Amanda
Okay.
Bickerstaff is the co-founder and CEO of that organization. And then I just dropped a link in the chat, which the Raise MIT, it's
Yep.
their daily curriculum, which is their AI curriculum, developing AI literacy.
Awesome. So we just have a couple minutes here and we have two kind of broader questions. I'm going to see if we can get to both of them. So the first is thinking about broader sustainability issues of AI. And so you talked earlier about just what are the environmental impacts of AI and how you consider that as part of the overall AI implementation, that that's one of the elements that you're thinking about. So the question is like broader sustainability about AI technology around water and energy consumption, labor conditions involved with data labeling, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like, how are you balancing what are some of the known detriments of AI with the benefit that it can bring to schools?
So in addition, what I didn't mention was in a part of our governance framework, a new addition that we made 2 months ago is our working groups.
Mhm.
And so our operating committee, as I mentioned, they like focus on their key domains. The working groups are meant to actually deliver on actionable items. And they're not a
Mhm.
different set of folks. They're actually, so we have our AI risk working group, which is what I'm going to reference
Mhm.
here. That working group is made up of members from all of the operating committees. So that's another way
Mhm.
of we cross-functional development of these groups is there is
Mhm.
instructional practice, data analytics, operational efficiency, and school leaders as a part of the AI risk group because we recognize AI risk hits all of those domains. When we talk about sustainability, that's another one of our principles, accountable and sustainable. And so that working group, the AI risk working group, one of the focus areas is ensuring that we do our research and we can provide information about
Mhm.
energy use and consumption. And then also when we think about what the tools that we're using, and going back to the fact that we are a Google district, seeing what they have available in our Google admin councils and the dashboards in terms of the energy use from our use of Gemini, as an example. So we want to start pulling all of that information together and start putting it on our AI guidebook website, the one-stop shop, so that we can be very transparent about what are we seeing in terms of actual research taking place for energy consumption, data centers, and then also what are we actually seeing from our usage of this technology? So we're not there yet, but that is absolutely something that we are paying attention to and incorporating into our working groups.
So we are just at the cusp of half past. So I'm going to close the questions at this point. Lauren, thank you so much, not only for giving your time today and sharing just candidly and openly about your experience of attending to the human side of AI implementation, but also the work you've done to partner with us on the overall AI, equitable AI adoption framework development, the whole project. And certainly the generosity you have in sharing the guidebook and your just community mindedness around we're all in this together, both the education field as well as the field more broadly. I hope folks who are listening to this and read the case study, CPS is certainly a big behemoth of an organization for managing change, but the lessons that we really distilled from that conversation and in the case study are really lessons that are applicable to all organizations, education and non-organization, non-education, large organizations and small organizations. It's really how you think about attending change, particularly that change around AI implementation. Lauren, thank you again for your generosity and for your expertise. And I look forward to continuing the conversation.
It was
Thank
a
you,
pleasure.
everyone.
Thanks for having me.